Okay, uh, I decided to do a little video with words here. I got my notepad. I'm going to do some explanation here in words uh, very soon. But I wanted to discuss, now that we're at this intermediate stage, how Native Americans would reduce very difficult stone with antler, bone, and stone tools, and not use steel like I'm using, right? How can we learn how they made their tools and they made their projectile points if I'm using steel? Yeah, it is totally different, right? I can power through a lot of these areas with steel that you can't power through nearly as easily with antler, bone, or stone. Okay. Now, I'm going to show some artifacts. Most of you are going to pick up on this really, really fast. But there's a small percentage of people who are insistent that the Native Americans figured out how to knap extremely tough materials with antler, bone, and stone. And it doesn't matter how tough it is, they actually knew how to do it, how to knap it with these soft materials to obtain extremely thin, very delicate, very extremely well made bifaces with natural tools. Okay. Now, I'm going to show that that's probably not the case. Okay, now I picked out some artifacts. Now, I'm not an expert, and I did cherry pick these. You know, you can criticize me and say, oh, you're just cherry picking. These are not going to explain everything. But I spent some time this morning looking through my artifacts, trying to find pieces. I found one that very closely matches the material of what I'm working on and how it looks like when they worked it. What did the bifaces look like when they worked theirs? Okay. Now I've got worse ones than this as far as thickness and step fracturing and random flaking and these bites taken out of the edge. I've got worse ones than this. I just don't have time to go through all my artifacts. This was the first one that popped up that it matched this material. Okay, now this material I thought was a tabular piece of chert when I first looked at it, and I started the video saying it was tabular, but it's actually an amoeba. It's amoeba chert, which has the characteristic of being very good on the outside but very bad on the inside. Now, tabular chert is that way also in many cases, but tabular chert also in many cases is very consistent, at least in the top half and bottom half, with a very thin layer, if there is one, of very bad stuff. You can stay above or below the bad stuff in the very middle of the tabular chert. With amoeba, the concrete and tough area is more bulbous and rounded, and it can be most of the mass of the amoeba chert. So what I had was a very flat piece of amoeba chert, and it's Edwards chert. Okay, you can look that up. Anyway, I tried to find something that matched the quality and consistency in my artifacts. This is an artifact. This is an actual artifact from the site that I was given artifacts from. Okay, and you can see this is how they knapped very difficult material. Now, is this extremely thin? Platforms well prepared, no step fractures, and very well executed? No. Most people, no, I shouldn't say that. Well, yeah, most people pick up on that, but there's a small percentage, and half of those are experienced nappers, don't understand this. They don't understand that it's very unlikely that Native Americans were highly successful at knapping extremely tough materials with antler, bone, and stone. It's highly unlikely. If you're a betting person, you understand this. If you place your bets, are they going to be knapping quality materials to obtain the very thin, well-executed pieces, or are they going to be using extremely tough material? Right? Place your bets. My bet is they are, once they encounter, they skinned off a lot of the material from these amoebas and they come up with something in the middle that's very tough, they abandon it, or they save it for later. Maybe they can make something else out of it, right? Or they save it for heat treating, and then once it's heat treated, they can use it. Okay, this does not look like it has any kind of heat damage. There is no grinding preparation that I can tell. There is some, once in a while I can feel a dull spot like right here, but for the most part there isn't much edge preparation or grinding. But where there is, it feels like they used a hammerstone, right? Because a hammerstone does not grind into the objective piece or the workpiece very much. Our modern abraders are built, and this substance here is made to grind through very tough materials. Okay, but hammerstones and like sandstone and quartzite and all that, they remove very little of the surface, and it takes a lot of effort to grind down the surface like I do on these to prepare. Now, you don't need to grind when you're using stone, bone, and antler. You don't need to grind very much, especially with a soft stone, right? But you can see this is how they dealt with tough stone like this. It's not very pretty. Okay, so we got that out of the way. I'm thinking we're going to get this out of the way eventually. And when they encountered pockets of concrete, this is what happens. This is a concrete-y type material, so is this one. And they're all Edwards Plateau chert of different, they're very similar varieties. But I think this one's the closest one to what I have. It could be this one, but I don't think so. This one is, the translucency is different. Mine has some translucency, but I think this is more translucent than mine. But this one has some translucency, and this one has more than mine. So these are just different varieties of Edwards Plateau chert, but these two match pretty closely. Okay, and this is how it looks like when they attempt to knap with stone, bone, and antler on this tough material. Okay, and we can also see how they were having difficulty even with a higher grade material. This is higher grade than this in the raw state. Now I know from experience that many of these stones will heat treat well, but for some reason, they may have not heated it, or they're just creating blanks from a quarry to bring back to heat later. But you can see what happens when they hit a concrete area. And this will give you a good idea, hopefully. I am receiving a phone call, but I'm going to ignore that phone call for now. I'm just going to show one more piece. This is an artifact from my collection. It's what they call a Curvill knife. It's very crude. And there's a reason why it's crude. Most of you will pick up on it. There's some that won't. Some of those are experienced knappers. It's crude because it's hard to make this with antler, stone, and bone. It's this type of material. This morning I looked around and I tried to find something that matched very closely. This is an amoeba type of chert. Same with this. Okay, I cracked it open, and the material is very similar. Okay, see how it has little speckles? It's very rough. Okay, it's very difficult to knap this with antler, stone, and bone. Extremely difficult. But it heats well. So what does that mean? What can we deduce? Why would they make it something out of non-heat treat? Well, for one, it doesn't need to be very pretty to be functional. This is perfectly functional as it is as a chopper. But it gives us a chance to see how they made this with antler, bone, and stone. There are examples that are very well made of this particular type of artifact. The Curvill knife, some of these are extremely well made. Now, why is that? It's because the material is a higher quality. That's the main reason. Now, can they make a beautiful piece out of this type of material? Yes. With antler, stone, and bone? Yes. But it requires a very patient person who is specifically trying to make beautiful pieces out of extremely tough stone. Now, back in the day, there's no advantage to that when it's perfectly functional like this. Today, there is an advantage for people to generate beautiful pieces out of extremely tough stone for clicks, for attention, for praise, or for just showing off skill. Now, back in the day, did they show off skill? Yeah, of course they did. But when you're trying to gather food, dig up roots or whatever, and you want to, there's lots of people doing it, you got to provide several of these, maybe on short notice, who knows, to people who are actually going to use it and not come back to you in 5 minutes saying, oh, your beautiful chip broke off because it was really thin. Or, I don't know why you're spending so much time. We got to go. We got to go. We got to go get some more food. Stop spending so much time trying to develop beautiful pieces from this very difficult material. So this is how they knapped difficult material. Step fractures, crude, uneven edges. They didn't prepare platforms, it looks like. They get the same type of issues that I get with them using steel or aluminum and that sort of thing. Okay? So that's what I wanted to get across with that. To answer the question, how did they make extremely delicate pieces with really tough stone? My bet is they didn't. They did not. They made stuff like this out of extremely tough stone. Extremely tough stone. Or they heat treated it. This heat treats well. This stuff here, you don't need to work it raw unless it needs to be extremely tough, which this tool does need to be extremely tough. It looks like a digging tool or a tool to smash roots or to pry between bones, to separate bones, you know, get into the cartilage and all that stuff. This looks like a very labor-intensive tool that needs to be tough. So you won't heat treat this. If you want to make some fine looking points, then you heat treat. Okay. All right. So I got 2 more questions in the time I have available in this particular video to discuss some platforms and stuff. Now, when it starts to get thin, how do you develop platforms? And sometimes it's possible to make a mistake and not know which side to create your platform on, or end up creating platforms on the wrong side, and then supposedly, you know, making mistakes and then blaming it on the platform. Okay. Well, this is a very difficult question. That's why I'm going to go over it. When a piece starts to get really thin, most instructions show the side profile of a biface to be like this, with the center line like this. But what is the reality? The reality is many times you're going to have a biface that looks like this. Now this I probably wouldn't use for a projectile point, but for a knife, yes. And where's the center line on this? The easiest way to know where the center line is imagine a balancing point. If you wanted to balance this on the edge, so that it's standing up like this, and you're trying to balance it, you're trying to balance it so it stay even. Where is it going to balance? That line, that balancing line, is your center line. So this will probably balance, I'm just guessing, something like that. That's your center line. So all of this is below center line? Yes. What do I do here? How do I know where the center line is? Okay. Good question. You divide this into sections when you're knapping. This is how I would divide it. This here is pretty clear where the center line is, so you know that well, actually it's not that clear. Let's divide this out. When you get a balance between upper and lower, so it's about the same amount of mass, it's pretty easy to know where the center line is. Here on this particular piece, your center line is going to be a little lower in this section. So to attack this bulb or this thick spot, you're going to need to drop your platform below this secondary dotted line to make it easy to remove that bulb or that bulge. Okay, these you can hit right at center line to remove mass on either side. And what do you do in here? This, you just treat this as a separate section, and your center line is going to be here. You create your platforms appropriately. What about this part here? Well, the center line is going to be kind of like that. So you create your platforms above and below that. Now, that's pretty straightforward. How can you tell if you're making a mistake by creating a platform on the wrong side in a situation like this? Well, the thing to keep in mind, we're going to zoom in on the edge. Most instructions will say this is the edge. Let's zoom in even further. I like to make sure that there is some sort of angle here, some sort of bevel or some sort of face here, so that the crack can initiate somewhere along that spot. Okay, we're zooming in. This is getting bigger and bigger. It's barely noticeable here, and it's not even noticeable on this scale. When you zoom in, you want the crack to initiate somewhere like that. If it initiates up here, you could end up with a flake like we were ending up yesterday that has a lip on it and takes a bite out of the edge. This is exaggerated. You know what I'm saying? It takes a bite out of the edge. This is called a bite or a lip. Okay, and they did it too back in the day. It's not something new. It's very common. So you want the platform to initiate, or the crack to initiate on what we call a platform. Now these can be many shapes. It can be concave, convex. It can be all kinds of weird. It can be multifaceted, I think they call it, etc., etc. But you want the crack to initiate somewhere on that spot. If it doesn't, you run the risk of creating a bite or a lip. Now, many guys, and not everybody, they think that this is created by some sort of tool dependent. Yes and no. The type of tool that you're using is relevant if it's very soft. Okay. Yes, a very soft tool will do this, because what you're doing with a very soft tool, when you hit a platform like this, it's actually deforming so much that you're wrapping the whole edge. This is your tool. Okay, or billet or whatever. You hit it on it, and you're actually wrapping the whole edge, so you're not initiating right here on the bevel or that platform. You're initiating somewhere up here. That's why it happens. But the reason why it happens is not because of the tool. It's because this soft tool is too high up on the platform, or the platform's too small. It's the platform, not the tool. Now you can say, well, I would bet that when you find lots of lips, it indicates soft tools. Okay, fine. You may win that bet. But the reason why it's doing it is because you're not initiating on the platform. Okay? All right. Let's change course here and go back to the initial question. Platforms on thin. How do I distinguish whether or not I'm on the right side or make them correctly? All right. This is the first thing. You need to make sure you have some kind of surface to where the crack will initiate from in a controlled manner. The next thing is very, very hard for some people, and it's just discretion. Now, I'm a little bit autistic. My sons are a little bit autistic. Discretion is very difficult for us. Everything has to be analytical. But it's just your discretion when it comes to knowing what side of the stone is the proper side, or how low to make the platform, or not getting confused. All right, it's discretion. You've got to become very good at knowing what'll work and won't work through practice. That's all I can tell you. I can't really give you more insight than that without going into extremely technical details. And this is as far as I want to go. I don't want to go any further than this on the technical details, because it requires many examples. I would have to break out a lot of different bifaces, a lot of different techniques, and explain the differences and that kind of thing. Because sometimes it doesn't matter where the center line is. I can generate a flake that'll travel without caring about where the darn center line is. I just know that it'll follow the ridge if it's convex. And my platform could be low. It could be below center line, above center line, right at center line, or it could be slanted. The platform could be slanted in a certain way, this way or that way, or it could not. It might not look like a platform. It could be all crushed and stuff. But I know from experience how to hit it so that it'll generate a flake that will either follow a contour or hit, or if it's a high spot, a thick spot, it doesn't even need a ridge. I know that even if I'm between these two ridges, I can still generate a flake between those two ridges that'll travel. But again, that's highly technical and all that. Hopefully with the number of videos that I do, you can pick up on that. Okay. All right. So I think I answered the two questions. How do they knap difficult stone and platforms on thin pieces? Now, as this gets thinner and thinner, I get more and more nervous with it. It's so easy to break. All right. So easy to end up with something like this. Now, this particular piece is more like this piece here. And I collected this stone myself. And this is an artifact. It's the same type of material. You're really going against nature, literally, when you try to knap it. It's tough stuff. And the Native Americans, didn't always have success with it. Okay, I think that's it. I could heat treat this to finish it out, but I won't. I'm going to sweat it. I'm going to do some pressure flaking along the edges to regularize it, to get it to where it's almost like a slab, a ground slab, or a slab that's been prepared for what they call flake over grind tool making. I'm gonna do a lot of regularizing on these edges just so I can try to create perfect flakes. so that I won't break this on video. Normally, if I'm just doing it off camera, I don't care about breaking it all that much. I actually saw an artifact the other day that took a piece like this and made a corner tang, or a center back tang out of it. You know, instead of a corner tang, this is a corner tang. They made a center back tang out of a broken tip. So all you got to do is put 2 notches in. One there and one there, and you can hang it by a lanyard. And it's an actual artifact. So I know that if I wanted to create an artifact looking thing, I just put a notch here, and there it is. It's a center back tang made on a broken tip. So that's kind of cool. Doesn't need to go to waste. But hopefully this will not become a broken tip center back tang knife. Okay? I do have some issues, but luckily that concrete does not go all the way through. See how it doesn't go all the way through to the back. That's encouraging. I might be able to skin that off. If not, then I'll just end up with a step fracture and I'll leave it in. I'll consider it good. I could narrow this down here and just make a what they call a leaf-shaped blade, which was very common in the archaeological record. But I think I mentioned that already. If I was smart, I would do that, but I'm not that smart, so I'm going to continue on the next video. Okay.